I want to talk about some cybersecurity principles that don't require us to be at a keyboard, but are important for you to understand, especially if you want to do anything cybersecurity wise. You're not going to be able to do it unless you know these concepts. So I wrote them down here. I've got them on my phone. I'm going to read them to you, and then in addition to that, I'm also going to explain them a little bit just so that you have a better idea of what these subjects mean and why they're important, because everything else that you're going to learn, all of it is focused on these two sets. The first set of principles are what are we actually doing with cybersecurity? Well, what we want to do is we want to ensure that we have data confidentiality, integrity, availability, non-repudiation, and authentication. So what am I talking about here? The first one is confidentiality. Things that need to be secret need to stay secret. Because if you have secrets that need to be kept and you can't keep them, then you're going to have a problem. This goes for the government. This goes for businesses. This goes for personal use. It doesn't matter where you're at. You have to be able to keep your secret secret. So what does that mean? For you as a user, the easiest way to think about this is if you have a Steam account where you play video games and you write down your password and somebody gets access to your password and then they go in and they start using your Steam account and they say a bunch of naughty words and they get you banned and you lose your account permanently and now you're out, let's say $6,000 and 10 years of using a Steam account. Well, that's a problem, right? You just lost something. On the other end of this, a business, they may be in a position where they need to deal with something like data related to an investigation, right? Let's just say that your business is involved in cleanup for toxic waste, and there are a whole bunch of people who want to know information about that case. They might want to sell land. They might want to get out of a business deal before it happens. There may be a bunch of financial reasons why having an understanding of what's going on in your business might be super important for them. So the only way for you to protect your business and the only way for you to keep that data from getting out and causing harm that you might even get sued for if you're a business, right, is you need to keep your confidential data safe, secure, quiet. People don't need to know. The next piece is integrity. If I'm a bad guy and I can get in and I can change your data and I can make that data say anything that I want, well, then the next thing is everything that you have on your system comes, I have to be suspicious of it all. I can't allow a single piece of data to be lost or changed without my knowledge and then expect any of the other data to be good. A really great example of this would be the OPM breach. So OPM is the Office of Personnel Management. What happened there was somebody broke into the OPM database and they were able to download the database. That database got sent to Russia, it went to China, it went to all kinds of different places. If you went and looked it up right now, you could find out that when the OPM database was breached within weeks, if not maybe just a month or two, China essentially went through and killed every American spy that was in China, simply because they now know who all of them are, because the OPM breach gave them a list of every single Chinese national who was receiving money from the US government. But the flip side to this is OPM as a database kept a lot of other additional information. So imagine that we had individuals who are being paid and they might be getting a retirement or something like that. Well, we didn't have a backup of the OPM database. So think for a minute what would happen if I gained access to that database and I put a bunch of fake people in there. And so now, are you going to be able to go through a, let's say, 300 to 500 million line database that includes a whole bunch of human beings who may or may not exist but are now receiving a check because I just put that data in there? So now it's like looking for needles in a haystack. Are you going to audit every single person who's ever received money from the government? Well, if you look at what's happening today in the news, well, they're trying. And I bet you, and they don't really talk about this in the news, but I think that this is probably valuable information for you to keep in mind, especially if you're going to be doing anything cybersecurity wise. the integrity of that data is bad. The integrity of the data that we have is bad. We don't really have a way of knowing whether or not the data that we have is true or not. So the only way to go through is to start manually, effectively flipping the key, turning off the lights, and seeing if anybody shouts and says, "Hey, I'm missing something." And then if they do, then you turn the lights back on and you continue to investigate. But if they don't call back, then you just leave that switch flipped. So something to think about, right? They call it the stream test. If you've never heard of this, they do this with servers particularly. If you have a server and you don't know what it does, turn the server off and then wait for somebody to come and ask you what happened to their data. And then you turn the server back on, right? The next piece is availability. What about getting access to that data? DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks. That would be related to availability. If you have a computer and I want to prevent you from using it, I can do a lot of different things. And most of those things that I'm going to do are going to consist of preventing you from being able to successfully use the computer. We also see this when people crypto lock computers. So if I can break into your system and then I can take control of all your data, prevent you from having access to that data, and then I can sell or rent that data back to you, then that is a highly effective way for making money. The next piece is non-repudiation. All non-repudiation means is we want every action on a system to be able to be attributed to a specific user and to know that the user that we are blaming for that action is the actual user who did it. So imagine for a minute you have an admin account and I steal your username and password and I log into the system and I deface a web page. Well, the problem here is everything comes back to you because it's your username and it's your password, right? And so now we have the case of one user pretending to be another user, and we don't want that. So that's a really gross oversimplification of that. Because of course we can use things like IP addresses, MAC addresses. There's a lot of data that we can collect about you and your users and you and your systems. But in general, those are the items that you want to understand. You want to know that the person who in your logs is listed as having taken an action is the actual person that took that action. That's what we want. That's what we want to know. So now that we understand what we're trying to do when it comes to keeping our data safe, and now that we understand like these are the things that we want to take action on, we want to be able to have confidence in our data. We want to know that that data is safe, that the secrets stay secret, and the people that need access to the data have access to that data, and that there are no problems. The next piece is, what if we want to break that? What if we want to get access to that data? What does that look like? So what there are 8 steps that you can follow, that a bad guy will follow, that anybody will follow. And these general 8 steps are going to be the actions and activities necessary to get illicit access to systems. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes people just leave the doors open. And sometimes it's accidental. That's another piece to this. Occasionally what you will discover is there are companies who have made mistakes and they have left back doors open, or they have taken an action that has led to somebody just leaving the company and then leaving their accounts open in some way. We saw this with a company where they had hired an intern, allegedly. Okay, so we have to just take their word for this, right? But they had hired an intern, and the intern had just used a very weak password on a system, and then that system just so happened to also being involved in using the exact same password for production, which was also still a weak password. And so somehow they blamed it on the intern, and somebody was able to break into a system via the intern's practice machine and then immediately pivot to another machine. So we're going to talk about that here in a second. So what are the 8 items that we're going to do generally in order to gain access to a system? So the first item is going to be recon. That could be mass scan, that could be nmap, that could be Shodan. There's a lot of tools that somebody might decide that they're going to use. And all it means is we're looking for systems. We want to know, is there an IP address out there? Does that IP address answer? Can I ping it? If I communicate with that IP address, what information comes back? For a long time, one of my favorite things, it used to be to get up and read what I called the VIP list. That VIP list is mostly gone now and they've hidden it. But back in the day, people would scan computers, and then the people who own the computer would write a letter. And usually that letter was angry, and it would say something stupid like, this computer is owned by a organization that works closely with the U.S. military to develop top secret missiles. Do not scan us. By scanning us, you're threatening our company, which does tens of millions of dollars in business with the federal government. And we have contracts and we have licenses. And if you scan us again, we're going to write a sharply worded letter again. Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for letting me know. How much money does your company make? Thanks for letting me know what you work on. Thanks for letting me know that it's secret. Thanks for letting me know that you have contracts with the US government and access to your systems could lead to me pivoting into more systems. That's all they would do. And I called it the VIP list because they were very important people, right? And they loved to tell people that they were very important people. And in general, they've kind of started the process of figuring out that it's a bad idea to get up and say, I have a lot of money, or I have access to a ton of resources, or please don't scan my stuff, because the sheer amount of money that are involved or wrapped up in the contracts that I work on is more money than some countries in Africa spend in their entire GDP. Great. I want to know that. Everybody wants to know that. That's fantastic information and we appreciate it, right? So, as far as recon is concerned, there are, in my opinion, 2 types of recon. There's active and passive. Passive recon just means that we're using other people's information. So you might go to a web page like I Know What You Download and then take a look at what people are downloading. And that's data that's been gathered by somebody else. You might do the same thing with Shodan. You go to Shodan. Shodan has already done all the scanning. They've done all the looking. They've done some massaging of the data. But then you can come in from behind and you can just look at everything that they've already put together. Now, active scanning would be actively running something like mass scan or actively running something like nmap. With mass scan and access to 2 servers on AWS infrastructure, I can scan the entire IPv4 IP address range in less than a day. Like literally, we can spend $20, $30 and I can find out what is behind every single IP address that I'm out there scanning. And then I can use other information, secondary and tertiary sources, in order to figure out even more data, right? So if we want to do that, that's easy, that's fast, but that's recon, right? We're looking. We got to find out. And sometimes you have a target and sometimes you don't. And so if you don't have a target and you're just shotgunning the effect in the hopes of accomplishing something, that's common. People do that. And you'll see it every single day. Go turn on a server, and within minutes, once you set up that server and the IP address is live, you can start checking your logs and people will start attempting to gain access to the machine using default settings and default usernames and passwords for lots and lots of different applications because they don't really care. They're just letting the machine run. And oftentimes they're using stolen resources anyways. It's not like the bad guy went to Amazon AWS and set up Control Tower and put together a system and then has an account called Hacking the Planet, and then within Hacking the Planet, they've set up an EC2 instance that's going out and individually scanning systems and attempting to conduct reconnaissance. No, they've broken into a system somewhere. They have access to those resources, and they're going to let the resources run all day because it doesn't cost them anything. The next piece to this is once we have a target, now we need to exploit that target. And there are lots of tools for exploitation, and there are also tools that are not necessarily digital tools. And what I mean by that is if I want to gain access to a business or a company or a government or any of these other places, I'm not necessarily going to sit down and start using tools that make a lot of noise, because I can use something like let's say Metasploit. So I set up the Metasploit interpreter, and I go out and I find an IP address, and then within that IP address I find out that there's a Windows 7 machine on the other side and it's vulnerable to Bluekeep. And so I go inside of Metasploit and I pick Bluekeep and I exploit the machine, and now I have access to the box. That's great, but it's not normally going to be the way that this stuff works, and it's not how it's going to work out for us. The truth of the matter is, the way that it's going to end up happening, and happens often, is I'm going to pick a company or a government agency or any location, and then once I have that organization as my target, I might go in and let's say it's a government. I'm going to FOIA the purchasing orders that they have made. And then once I have those purchasing orders, I'm going to custom build an email, or I'm going to build communication that looks like something that they're used to, right? Because if I just make something up, somebody's going to spot that and they're going to say no. The where this was really successful was in a targeted attack against Google. Google bought a lot of servers, and this guy knew exactly what Google's purchasing process looked like. So what he did was he made a bunch of invoices that looked legitimate, following the exact same style and methodology that Google typically uses. So if they're going to go out and they're going to buy a server, they do it a very specific way. He just copied that and then sent them a bill. And he said, hey, this is a bill for $22 million. Send me the money. And the person on the other end, not taking the time to check all of that, sent him the money. And he said, oh, this is effective. So he did it again, and he did it again. And he ended up sending them bills for hundreds of millions of dollars. And it got to the point where he was just doing this every single month. I personally believe that's probably his downfall. His real downfall was the fact that he didn't stop. But what he did was he started going to other companies. So he started going to Apple, and he started going to Facebook, and he started going to Google, and he started going to all of these major corporations that make lots of purchases, and then just sending them bills for services and goods that don't exist, and they were repeatedly paying it. And again, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars funding this guy's lifestyle. And why not, right? Like, if you're not going to check your bills and you're not going to check to see what you're doing, you're putting your company at risk. You're putting your organization at risk. One of the things that I'm very, very proud of is the fact that at my organization, somebody actually sent a bill. It was fake. And somebody actually took the time to come to me and say, hey, does this look real? And I said, no, absolutely, that's not real. We are not using that technology. But they were smart. They had looked at what the purchasing orders look like. Not only that, they had sat down and they had done it under a specific amount of money, because if you spend more than a specific amount of money, then it has to go in for further, like, eyes on. And so all of these organizations typically have a point where if you hit a certain number, then they can't just send you the money. Somebody has to look at it. And so again, this becomes a very simple method. You go find out where are they spending their money, how much money are they spending, and you start sending letters. And so that is just a method of exploitation. Who can do Metasploit, you can get access to a system, you can use Python to get into a machine, you can send somebody an infected PDF, you can pivot somebody from a Google Doc, and then once they click on the Google Doc, then they have to click on a link that's going to send them to a Word document, and then that Word document is going to run a command inside of Internet Explorer, right? And then somebody now has access to a system or all of your information, or so on and so forth. That's exploitation. But once you're in and you have gotten access to a system, how do we become persistent? And this goes back, again, the concept of persistence is not just you having a conversation about, hey, does my system allow me to install software? So if so, I'm going to do something like install GoToPC, right? So somebody installs GoToPC and that becomes their back door into the system. If you have access to a Windows computer and you have access to being able to install software, I'm going to tell you right now the number one go-to method of attacking a system by just installing some kind of stupid remote desktop software, probably not a great idea. A more effective method, especially when it comes to trying to gain and keep persistence, would be something like PowerCat. So PowerCat is an implementation of Netcat. You can get that installed directly from a URL. So think about it this way. If I can trick you into clicking on a link, then I can potentially get your system to run a PowerShell command. And then if I can get you to run that PowerShell command, I can get you to install software directly from a URL. You don't even have to click on anything. It just goes to GitHub, pulls down a copy of PowerCat, and then the PowerCat shell can automatically set itself up for a reverse shell access, right? And now I have access to your local PowerShell, and I'm not running anything that people are typically looking for. Because the moment that I suspect that you're in a system, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at software like GoToPC and GoToMeeting and just a host of applications that are used for remote desktop. Whereas most people are probably not at the level yet where they're going to start taking a look to see, are there ports open? And if those ports are open, like what's running on this port? Oh, I don't know. This is weird. It says that there's PowerCat on this port or whatever. They may not have the knowledge or the know-how to start looking at that. But for the vast majority of individuals who are breaking into systems and conducting attacks, they're absolutely not looking at it from the perspective of how do I gain persistence and then keep it. That's why they tell you that it's like APTs, advanced persistent threats. Those are the folks who are going to use something like PowerCat. It's not going to be some random guy from overseas who's conducting tens of thousands of attacks daily on systems here in the United States. It's fast stuff. It's things that are effective against grandpa. That's what he wants. He wants fast money, continuous money, and the money needs to come in as quickly as possible. Sitting there and massaging a setup and then getting in and staying persistent for years, probably not as effective for him in the long term of being able to make money, simply because the longer you are connected to a system, the more likely it is that you're either A, going to get caught, B, somebody's going to figure out who you are, or C, eventually they're going to shut down your access and then you're going to lose access to the system. The next piece is, once I have persistence, how do I get escalation of privileges? Under Windows, there's lots of ways to do that, tons of scripts. I think that this goes hand in hand with the next piece, which would be the internal recon on the network itself. So if I have access to a network and I am in, what am I going to do? Well, the very next thing I want to do is I want to figure out how do I get to the highest level of privileges on the network. And that's going to require different tools and different techniques. And it may require you to move away from technology once more. One of the things that people used to do was they would sit there and they would harvest all of the emails to figure out who is the network administrator, who's the guy in charge. Another piece to this is, once you're inside of that network, it doesn't hurt, if you can do so, to run something like Wireshark or T-Shark and then grab all of the HTTP network traffic, because a lot of locations are still running internal network traffic over HTTP. A lot of them have not moved over to doing things via HTTPS. And so once you can get into a network and you have access to that HTTP traffic, the next thing that you should be doing is looking for every single place where password exists inside of the word T-Shark. So if you see that it's passing the word pass or password followed by a string of characters, start looking there. Because now you have a lot of information about what's going on that network. What are people connecting to? They may be going to an intranet site. And for businesses, because they oftentimes will have a very difficult setup for the user, like it makes it very painful for the user. You got to change your password every 30 days. Well, that user is going to use the same password everywhere. If it was up to me, we'd all be using password managers, and you don't necessarily need to change it every 30 days. You just use a different password everywhere. You use your password manager, and then you're good to go. And that increases our security significantly. Instead, you go to these businesses and these government agencies, and what do? They say, oh, we want you to change your password every 25 days or every 35 days. And so the user goes, okay, and they sit there and they use the same password everywhere, which means there is a higher likelihood that I'm going to find that user's password somewhere inside of the network, as opposed to having to sit around and hope that I can trick one of the users to send an email with his password in it or something like that. We don't want to do that. Another thing that you might want to do is look at the traffic that's being used internally, especially if they're doing communication related to like service accounts. Look at those service accounts, because if they configured the service accounts incorrectly, they may be passing passwords and service account usernames in clear text somewhere on the network on a like a regular basis. Check around 3 a.m., check around midnight, check around those like rounded numbers, particularly at nighttime whenever the systems are not at peak use. That's what you want to do. So once you're in the system and you have access to everything and you need to escalate privileges, it's very easy for you to look and try to find any kind of service account or any kind of account that's being used that's going to reveal to you in plain text what they're working on the network itself. Keep an eye out for those items. And then once you've escalated your privileges somewhere and you're pretty sure that you can stay inside the system, the next piece is going to be internal recon. And this is a continuation of that scanning and looking. T-Shark, Wireshark, any of these tools, they can be ran and they can be used to start gathering data about the network. Now, understand that a lot of these tools are also listed as being important or items of interest for any kind of system that exists on a network, specifically for finding out, are you doing something bad, right? So if they have set up CrowdStrike, or if they have set up a tool that is supposed to be monitoring website traffic and internal network traffic and tool traffic and what's being run on systems, the moment that they see something like T-Shark, like any of these tools, that those are going to start the process of potentially notifying somebody that you're on the network. So how do we get around that? Understanding tools like Python and some of the programming languages that are out there, and being able to use those tools. Most servers are going to come with what installed? Python, right? You install a new copy of Ubuntu or a copy of Red Hat, or you even install a copy of FreeBSD. They all come with Python. They all have it. Take a look at what's on the network. If you have access to Python, see, can you install pip? Is pip already on there? Can you get access to some of the tools that are existing on the system already? And then you can start that process of pivoting from there. But again, if you use anything that's not custom, then you're probably going to get identified very quickly by the heuristic scanning of tools like CrowdStrike. Like, it's just going to happen, okay? So once you've done your internal recon and you've ran a scan, including mass scan or in-map or anything like this, just to figure out what's on the network, the next piece is going to be lateral movement. You're going to want to be able to move from system to system. And the vast majority of locations, especially post-COVID, the idea of keeping stuff mostly disconnected from the rest of the network, like having an air gap, a lot of that's gone out the window. I know for a fact that I have seen a humongous uptick in the number of Ethernet to serial or serial to Ethernet tools that are now out and about, out in the world. There's a lot more devices that have been connected to the internet so that they can be worked on from long distances. Now, I'm not going to be the person who gets up and says that that's a bad thing. Because personally, I don't think it is. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think that it's fantastic if you secure your network. If you can sit down and you can secure your network and you can put everything together so that this is not a problem, then that is okay. And that's where you need to come at this from. So once we've done lateral movement, the next piece is maintaining our presence. Once you're in a system and you start poking around, you're making noise. And as soon as you start making noise, somebody's going to notice it. I have talked to people who have had to respond to attacks on critical infrastructure like water. And one of the things that tipped anybody off that somebody was inside the network was the fact that the bad guy was sitting there and started playing with gauges, just started moving things for no reason. Not an attack execution, not a hey, I'm doing this because I'm specifically setting up the system to break or I want to start the process of dumping chemicals. Nothing. It's just, oh, am I in? Oh my god, I am in. What's the very first thing I'm going to do? I know. I'll just start spinning knobs. And that's exactly what the bad guys do, and that's how they get caught. And that's the difference between a trained attacker, somebody who understands these concepts, who knows that once they've gained access to a system, they need to fall as deadly quiet as they possibly can, as opposed to experimenting. Experimenting on the target network is not the effective way to operate inside the target network. And this probably sounds self-evident to some people, but you'd be surprised how many people sit down, they get access to a network, they execute an attack, they have persistence to the network, and the very first thing they do is start experimenting with running commands, and it trips off somebody's snort heuristics or their CrowdStrike. And the next thing you know, they've been locked out of the system simply because they weren't paying attention to what they were doing inside the network, or they weren't at a level yet where they could operate comfortably inside of that network without making more noise than is necessary. And then our final piece is the how do you finalize your attack? And this is super important because you need to think about your attack from a lot of positions. If you are in a network and you have gained access to those systems and you are going to do something, you should have already planned out your course of actions from the very beginning. You shouldn't be getting into a system and what did we just talk about? Flipping knobs. Oh, I'm going to flip knobs and it's going to make things look crazy on the manual system. They're located on site. And the guy who's worked there for 20 years is going to look and say, ooh, that's a problem. And now you've been locked out of the system. The actual effective method of handling the entire process is to sit down and say, I am going to gain access to this system. My goal is persistent access to whatever my foothold system is. All right. And the last piece is finalizing the attack. Finalizing the attack just means whatever it is that you had planned to do, that's what you do. You do the thing because what you will find is there are plenty of individuals who will execute these attacks that get into a system. They may even be able to spread around the multitude of boxes, and now they have access to everything. And at the end of the day, they have no actual plan for successfully gaining anything out of whatever it is that they did. This is why things like crypto locking as a service is so popular, because it really takes a lot of the guesswork out of whatever it is that you're doing, right? All you have to do is find a system, and as soon as you get access, you just run a bunch of scripts. And if the scripts jive with whatever the network infrastructure is, then now you have a successful attack. And everything else is effectively handled for you on the back end. Somebody sets up the Bitcoin address. Somebody leaves a message that says, hey, this is where you pay. Somebody else makes sure that everything is taken care of, or the script takes care of it, right? And so you, as the bad guy, share a cut of whatever it is that you need to share. And at the end of the day, everything else is handled. In addition to that, as I mentioned previously, you have individuals who will get into a system and then they start exploring, and then that's how they get caught. And if they get caught for exploring, somebody will typically go in and shut down their access, and then they're out of the system. It's the folks who have a plan, who get into the machine and then get in there quietly and stay quiet without having to explore, and has a plan in place for what they will do once they have ultimate access to the machine. Those are the individuals who are going to succeed, and they're the ones that are going to be able to hit your network really, really hard. Or if you are out and you're doing an operation and you're one of the people who are out there doing those things, because there are people who work here, right, within the United States. This is not the purview of only outside organizations who do this kind of stuff. But it is important to understand, if you're looking at it from the bad guy's point of view, if you're looking at it from the point of view of somebody who's doing the operation, then yeah, having a plan and knowing what you're going to do once you have access is the ultimate piece to all of this. So just to recap, we want to protect our data, and then we want to keep other people from being able to get access to, take access away, or otherwise affect our data. And the entire process can be broken down into looking around, finding a target, getting access to the target, scanning the network, getting access to other systems, making sure that you keep access to those systems. And then at the end of the day, all you have to do is have a plan for what you're going to do in order to ultimately take advantage of everything that you found. So that is the entire process. I have tried to say this as quickly as possible, and hopefully it helps you.